Welcome to Granites Edge, a Republican-led legislative action program bringing information to our residents of Pelham and New Hampshire. News about legislation that's happening right now in our state capital of Concord that will affect you. Why are we called Granites Edge? Our small town of Pelham, New Hampshire is located on the southern border of our wonderful Granite State, so we're right on the edge. And as all of you know, that edge is exactly what we have over others. Granites Edge. In this program, we'll take a dive into some of the most important legislation of this session. We'll talk to legislators about the challenges in our state and about the committees they serve on. And every month, we'll have a special guest, someone who's an expert in their field who will bring you the truth about important topics that are linked to important legislation that may affect your liberty and freedom. Your host today is Herschel Nunez, an elected state representative right here from Pelham, New Hampshire, who thinks it's important that you know what the legislators know. So stay tuned. We have a great show for you today.
Hello and welcome to Granites Edge. It's been a while since we've been in. We've been off on vacation. It's legislative month off, so this month we're not going to talk about legislation. We have a special guest for you. Steve Negron is here, the Honorable Steve Negron, and he's running for CD2 seat right here in our state. Steve, how you doing?
Hi, Herschel. Nice to see you.
Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
You know, I feel so flattered that you're here. It's an honor for me to have you on the show. And a thing that a lot of the folks have realized is that I have a lot of my friends on the show, and you and I happen to be friends as well.
You bet.
We met on the campaign trail last year, and we were campaigning together and running together.
Yep.
Unfortunately, you had an unsuccessful bid last year.
That's right.
But rumor has it you're coming back.
I am running again. That's not a rumor, it's a fact.
Steve, we want to talk to you a little bit today about you.
Okay.
We want to do a little introduction to the people in our district. We carried you well.
Yes, you did. We won Pelham.
You won Pelham?
Absolutely.
Did you win Hudson? I think you won Hudson too.
Well.
Yeah.
Yes.
District 37 went in your favor.
Yes, it
and
did.
We were very proud for that.
Thank you.
And but I think that this time around, now that your name's out there, let's let everybody learn a little bit more about you.
Sure.
And because you have a very interesting story. Let's talk about your family, where you come from.
Right.
I know there's a great story about your grandparents,
Yes.
About your parents, about how everybody came to the United States. Give us a little information about that.
Well, sure. Well, thank you. And again, thank you for having me on. This is the pleasure is mine to be able to sit and talk with a friend and to let people get to know me a little bit better. So my grandfather came from a state in the western part of Mexico called Michoacan. And he actually came across the legal way, the right way, in 1921. And made his way to New York City. He had wanted to make a name for himself and an opportunity for himself. And he met my grandmother, who had come there from Puerto Rico. Now, people still believe that Puerto Ricans are immigrants, but in fact, Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. And my grandmother was a very accomplished woman. She was a chemist and she was a teacher. And she needed to move out of the island of Puerto Rico to try to find the same opportunity that my grandfather was looking for. So it was unfortunate that the only job my grandmother could find in New York City was in a chocolate candy factory. And then she met my grandfather, and they got married, and they had two daughters, my mom, Sylvia, and my Aunt Irma. And when my grandfather became a naturalized citizen in 1947, and while he was there, he was working on boilers on U.S. cruise ships for the war.
Oh.
And he was so proud of becoming a U.S. citizen that he took my Aunt Irma back to Michoacan to tell the village that he had actually made it and he'd become a U.S. citizen. It was unfortunate that he contracted typhoid when he went back because of the water and the filtration and the sanitary situation. And on his way back to New York, he was very ill, and he passed away in 1947. And my aunt also contracted typhoid. And it was interesting, back then they would send him to a home in upstate New York, away from everybody. And as a matter of fact, as the story goes, my grandfather passed away, and they didn't want to tell my aunt, even though my mom knew and my grandmother knew. And so my aunt found out about it when she was looking at some condolence cards when she came back. So then my grandmother was alone in New York City, and she had to find a way to make a living. So she became a seamstress, and she became a seamstress in the Bronx in New York. And that's how she made a living to support my mom and my aunt. And the funny thing about it is I have one sibling, a sister, and my grandmother used to send my sister boxes of dresses. And I used to open up these boxes and ruffle through them thinking there'd be a pair of pants or maybe a shirt or something. And nothing. So she only did was dresses. And that's how I actually learned to sew, because my grandmother came to live with us when we were living in Spain, and I'll tell you how we got there. And I used to sit with her next to her sewing machine. And my grandmother used to just, people don't remember McCall patterns when you used to look in a store.
Oh, I remember.
Remember McCall patterns? And she'd just look at a picture and come back, and from memory, she'd cut out her paper and make her patterns, and then she'd sew. And so I was the one always sewing stuff for the children, whether it was Boy Scout patches or Girl Scout patches or hemming pants or whatever. My father, his father was from Puerto Rico, and my father, at a very young age, at about 11, came to New York with his younger brother, Uncle Freddie, again, to try and find a better life. Now, my father had a misspent youth in New York, and had a choice early on in his life to either join the service or find that he'd be wearing another type of suit.
Oh, goodness.
And, so he decided in 1953 to go to the nearest recruiting station. It's the same recruiting station that's in Times Square. Right now it's a triangular building. And as my father tells the story, he has since passed, that he walked in, the first guy he talked to was an Army guy. And he says, how fast can you get me out of New York City? And he says, it might be a week. It was not soon enough. Went to the Navy guy, nothing. Went to the Air Force guy, and the guy says, I have a bus leaving tomorrow for Whitehall, New York, to go get your physical, and then on to Sampson Air Force Base, New York, for basic training. He goes, I'll be an Air Force guy. And he stayed in the Air Force for 33 years.
Wow.
Ascended to the rank of Chief Master Sergeant, which is the highest enlisted rank in the Air Force. I'm very proud of my dad. So we lived all over. And my mom, who was a dancer, met my father, as my dad tells us, he was actually in the New York Guard. And in the Army Guard, they wear a lot of brass. So my mom didn't know any difference. So my father told my mom he was a lieutenant. He wasn't. He was just a private. But my mom was taken back, and they got married. And my dad was out in Roswell, New Mexico, and bought my mother a bus pass. And she drove from New York to Roswell, New Mexico on a bus, and they got married. And they were married for 57 years until they both passed away. So, but being a military dependent, we lived all over, Herschel. We went back to Puerto Rico. Originally, I was born in El Paso, Texas, and then at a very early age, we moved back home. Raised by my grandmother, and then my dad was sent over to Southeast Asia twice, once to Guam and then once to Thailand, and then we went to Spain. And then I grew up in Spain. We were there from 1970 to 77. I loved it. It was a way. And why it's so important to me today is that it gives me an appreciation for this country.
Now, when you lived in Spain, Spain was under a little bit different type of rule back then, right?
Absolutely, very good. It was underneath Generalissimo Franco, who was a dictator who ousted King Alfonso XIII during the Spanish Civil War in the 30s. And people don't realize that Germany actually helped Francisco Franco in his bid to oust the king, and they kind of field tested some of their weapons that they eventually used in World War II.
Wow.
In the Spanish Civil War. So we lived under a dictatorship.
And you were there from your late childhood till your sort of your mid-teens, right?
I was there when I got there when I was 9 and left when I was 17. So that's where I grew up. Lifelong friends from our high school. We were there with the Department of Defense school. But because Spanish is my first language, we lived on the economy for 5 years. So I'd come home and I'd get a piece of bread and a chocolate bar and a soccer ball. And we'd go outside and play. It was just my way of life. We would drink red and white wine every night in the house. Because that's what we did. I remember as a 12-year-old with 2 little kegs going down to what's called the bodega and getting it filled with vino tinto, vino blanco, red and white wines, and bringing it back home. So and I tell the story, I was with my grandmother who then came to live with us, and we shopped every day because there wasn't there was refrigerators, but everything was fresh over in Europe. Right. And
there were farmers markets and things that you went to.
You bet.
Fresh produce out there all the time.
Not so much meat, because meat scared you. You'd have rabbits hanging and everything else hanging, and it wasn't as sanitary as you like. Right. But for the other things, we'd go shopping with my grandmother. And I remember I was probably 12, and I saw this young man go through the market and steal oranges, Herschel.
Oh, goodness.
Probably 3 or 4 oranges. Now, Franco had a state police called the Guardia Civil, the Civil Guard. And there was no crime in Spain. I mean, we were living, it wasn't even socialist, it was a dictatorship. And this young man was running, and this Guardia Civil lifted up his cape. He had a Uzi submachine gun, and shot him dead in the square.
And that's what happens under a dictatorship.
And that's what happens, and that's what you get when you get socialism. And we can talk about that later.
Yeah.
But then he lowered his cape down and kept on walking, and the local constabulary came out and took care of it. So, you know, that really made it a profound impact on me as a young man. So I went home and I asked my grandmother, my dad, what happened, and my dad tried to explain to me about personal freedoms. And at a very young age, I realized that freedoms, people fight for them. They're supposed to be held onto and not given away freely, and to be cherished and appreciated. And as a young man growing up, I realized that when I went back to the States and I was able to do what I wanted to do within reason, meant something to me where I couldn't have done that necessarily if I had stayed in Spain.
When you came back to the States, it's a wonderful story, and I like the way that you can reflect on how different the life was and how the government system was different, because that's going to sort of tie into what we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. You came back to the States and you went to college.
I came back for my junior and senior year in Oklahoma, and that was an interesting paradigm, right? Because we lived in Europe for 7 years, and my father always used to say, family meeting, you know, I've got my orders, we're going to a new place, and he told us we were going. It was a little town in the southwest part of Oklahoma called Altus, Oklahoma.
Okay.
I couldn't find it on a map. So luckily that I was in athletics, so I played football and I played baseball there, and had a great 2 years, and then I went off to school and followed my sister's footsteps.
At Texas Christian University.
Texas Christian University,
Yes.
That's right, at TCU.
And your studies there.
So it's funny, you know, I like to tell my children that I went there with a purpose. I was playing baseball in college, and that was what I thought was my purpose. And I ended up being a criminal justice major because I thought I was going to go on to law school until I realized that was 3 more years of school. And I realized, well, maybe that's not my calling. And I was in the ROTC program. I was in the Air Force Junior ROTC program overseas at my high school in Spain. They didn't have it in my high school in Oklahoma. But I always had this desire, not because my father pushed me at all, but I was raised around patriots my whole life. That's all I ever knew. And it's a calling, you know, and I saw the life that it gave my parents and my parents' friends and my friends who had their parents in the military. And I said, you know, this isn't a bad thing. You know, you serve, it's about service. I was always around people who gave of themselves. And so I went into the ROTC program. My sister had a 4-year scholarship, so she was 2 years ahead of me. So she was kind of my pathfinder. She was leading the way. And a little bit difficult, you know, being from a traditional Hispanic family where my dad was not so much somebody who was into women's lib at the time, but my sister was very strong-willed. And so I followed her footsteps, and I joined the ROTC program and got commissioned in 1983.
And then you had a long stint in the service.
I did. So my unique, and President Reagan was my president. You know, I was a intercontinental ballistic missile combat crew member. So in the height of the Cold War, I was one of the guys 90 feet underground that had responsibility for 10 nuclear weapons. And as a 23-year-old, that's a pretty awesome responsibility.
It's also a lot of pressure on the shoulders too, isn't it?
You know, and you know, usually at 2 in the morning, one crew partner can rest, and you see these 10 rows of lights, and each row of light represents one nuclear weapon. You know, it's pretty daunting when you realize the amount of responsibility and the amount of destructive power that we choose to use in a defensive posture. I've heard some rhetoric that people say that we're offensive. Never been offensive. You know, we are.
It's a deterrent posture.
Absolutely.
Yep.
You know, and I had my best friend used to say that we have to do our job so well that we never have to do it.
I like that.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I like that.
So I did that for 4 years, and then I taught what's known as the emergency water procedures, how we would react to messages should they come from the National Command Authorities or the President. And then I had the best assignment of my life. I was going to Italy. I was going to go be a munition site commander in this remote town, a resort town called Rimini, Italy. And I said, this is it. So I bought my Fodor's book. I was reading up on it. I'm like, this is it. My plan was to go over there, find a nice Italian woman, marry, open up a bar, never come back to the States. About 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave, of course, the needs of the Air Force outweighed the needs of the individual. They said, nope, you're not going there. You're going to this place called Hanscom Air Force Base.
Oh, goodness.
Where's that?
Right here in Massachusetts.
I had no idea. He goes, it's just outside of Boston. You know, the good Lord works in his ways, and the best assignment I could have had. So I came here in '89 as a young man doing acquisition and how we buy weapon systems for the military. I had no idea what that was all about. I came from a different world, an operational world. but it gave me an opportunity to learn a trade that I parlayed after I retired from the military. And that's how I met my wife, Terry.
Terry is such a lovely person. She's such a sweetheart. I really like her. Had the opportunity to be around her several times at different events and things that we've all been to. Very, very, very nice lady. Please give her my best.
I will. You know,
now, you and Terry got married and you moved to New Hampshire.
We did. So I moved originally in '89.
Yep.
And I moved to New Hampshire because at the time Massachusetts had what's known as no-fault car insurance. So up to $2,500, I think that was the amount. No matter whose fault it was, you had to pay for it. So I moved 1 mile into New Hampshire. They don't have that, and I save all that money. You know, for a young captain, that's a lot of milk.
Yeah.
So I decided to move to New Hampshire, and I tell you, Herschel, I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the people. I fell in love with the town. I did the commute from Nashua all the way down to Bedford. And then my wife, who's a environmental attorney by trade, was coming up here because there was 3 towns were suing the Air Force Base. And so that was her case. And so she was come up here to do some discovery work. And I happened to be working with a woman who was stationed with my wife in England because my wife was on active duty as well. And then she got out to be a reservist. And so Julie Crossland, who lives in Hudson, said, "Why don't you come over for dinner?" And I said, "Is this a blind date?" She goes, "Yes, it is." And I said, I'm not going. So a good friend of mine said, "You know what? It's a home-cooked meal, right? You laugh at
Go get it.
jokes, go get it, right?"
Yeah, go get it.
And that was February 24th of 1991. I went over there. I met my wife. It was right after Desert Shield, Desert Storm, the first one. She was telling some silly jokes, and we've been together ever since. And so 3 kids later.
3 kids later, you have 2 sons and a daughter, right?
Right. So my oldest, Stephen, is with the Air Force Special Operations Command. He's still following the tradition of our family as a CV-22 crew chief. Jamie, our youngest, is going to go in about 6 months. And then our daughter, Katie, is a junior at Texas Christian University, which is my alma mater, as well as my sisters, my nephew. And
you must be really proud.
I am.
Yeah.
I am. You know, but we wherever she wanted to go.
Yeah.
You know, I never forced her into anything, but she's a frog.
Yeah.
So.
There you go. There you go. Well, now you guys are here in New Hampshire. You settled here. You've raised your family here. Steve, when did you decide that you wanted to become politically active? We all know that you're a Republican.
Right.
And we know that you had a bid for state representative and you won that seat.
I did.
Were you politically active before that?
No.
But you made a choice and you ran for the State House.
I did. It was funny. It was my wife who was more politically active. She was the co-chair for Veterans for Scott Brown.
Okay.
And so, I would go to events with her, and I used to say that I was the trophy husband. Right? And then she helped out with Carly Fiorina in her campaign, and we had actually hosted Miss Fiorina at the house for a meet and greet. I was a Marco Rubio guy early on, and so I was doing some things in the background. And then and then we certainly supported Senator Ayotte when she was running as well. So there was one time, it was in 2015, somebody asked me if I would consider running for the State House. And I was the unofficial videographer for the Bishop Girton girls volleyball team.
Okay.
And so I went every home game and every away game. My daughter played volleyball there for 4 years, and that was just something that I liked to do. And I said, if this would affect my ability to be the videographer, then I'm not doing it, because to me, family's first. They said, no, you can run. You can still be the videographer. You won't get sworn in until January or December of that year. So I said, okay, because it was going to be my daughter's senior year. And I ran as a Republican in Ward 5.
Ward 5 Nashua.
Ward 5 in Nashua.
Yep.
So there was Dave Murataki and Don LeBrun.
Yeah.
With the 2 guys, 2 great guys, 2 great mentors, and myself. And at that time, we were 3 strong Republicans out of Ward 5. And I loved it. And I tell you, as you are now experiencing now, the thing that made the biggest impact on me, Herschel, was in committee meetings. And I sat on the election law with some phenomenal people, that people would drive 2.5 hours to be able to sit for 5 minutes of your time, because they fundamentally believed that they had a voice, that they believed that they could affect change. And you know what? That's the way this country is supposed to be.
And you know what, Steve? I completely agree with you. That is the most rewarding piece of the job. I do the job now.
Yeah.
You know the job. You've done the job. that is the most rewarding piece of that job, is when you find that one person who comes in, and whether or not you agree with their point
Absolutely
of view,
right. Absolutely.
they show up and their knees are shaking and their lips are quivering,
Right.
and they are out of breath and they're flushed in their face and they're having a hard time getting through a testimony, because it's really hard sitting
It
there
is.
with all those
'Cause they
guys
think we're
looking at
something
you.
important.
Yeah, we're their neighbors.
We're their neighbors.
That's right.
Right.
And, and you know, I'm sure that you're like me. I used to get up and walk out of there and shake their hand and
Absolutely.
say, you know what, thanks for coming here and doing this. You did a great job, and come be a voice again.
Absolutely. And that's
Yep.
what it's about. I mean, and that's us at the local level, you know, and that's going to be the same thing at the national level. It's about, you know, do we fundamentally have a voice with our representatives in Washington, right? And so that was the one thing that made me kind of say, you know what, it is about citizen legislature. That's who we are in New Hampshire.
That's who we are.
You know, and I'm sure when you talk to people, you tell them, hey, we have 400 legislators. They shake their head. You know, you go to Texas or Florida, and they're like, how do you do that?
How do you have that
How do
many
you have
people
that
in
many
one
people?
room?
And I say, well, it's kind of like training wheels, you know. But the funny thing about it is, however the makeup of the House is, you at times get together and you pass good legislation. At times you don't, but for the most part, you're congenial. You are neighbors, you know, and it's not necessarily all the time the divisive nature of politics that you see in the national level. But unfortunately, sometimes that creeps back into our state.
I think that probably made you look at this district
Yes.
of CD2
Yes.
and think about how your opponent, you're coming up in another race here,
Right.
How your opponent has been able to survive in CD2 and make some of the decisions that have been made for CD2.
Right.
Steve, I want to move this conversation into talking about CD2 a little
Sure.
bit, because this is really what we're here to talk about. I appreciate all of the family history. You know, I learned something in this. I thought I knew a lot about you, but I learned a lot about you. You last in 2018, before 2008, probably 2017, you decided that you were going to take a run for CD2.
That's correct.
And this is a run and a risk in a district that has been controlled by your opponent for several terms now.
We're fourth term now. Yep.
And also an opponent who seems to be able to come up with a lot of money. So let's talk about your last run.
Sure.
What those decisions were that made you run, and how that race went and what you learned from it.
Absolutely. Well, as I mentioned earlier, Herschel, having people come and believe that they had a voice was really the linchpin for me. And I would sit down among friends, you know, on a weekend barbecue, and we're talking about it. You know, it was one of those things, who do we have at the federal level that does that for us? And I got to be honest with you, I don't think it's my opponent. I really don't. And when you start talking to people, even though she's been successful, I would tell you she's been successful because we haven't done the things that we need to do to be more competitive. I'll be honest with you, you know, we learned a lot of things. So, you know, a lot of people said she's a 3-term incumbent. She's got $3.5 million. You know, you have no name recognition. You know, nobody's backing you. Why do you want to take this on? And the answer is very simple. It's because I want to take it on. Now, I knew that it was a tough hill to climb, but it doesn't mean that I shy away from an opportunity to excel. And so, you know, we went at it, and what I found out is that the 2nd Congressional District is a very large district.
It's huge.
When
we talk, I want to look at some of my notes here
Sure.
on that. We look at the CD2 district. It is so widespread. It goes from Canada
Yep.
to Massachusetts,
Yes.
and from Vermont to Concord.
Yes.
It's that entire western portion of the state from top to bottom.
Right.
And it includes the cities of Nashua
Yep.
and Keene, Claremont, Lebanon, Concord, Lancaster, Berlin, and Grafton County, all of Grafton County, the towns in Grafton County.
Yep.
And those cities are challenges for us.
Yes, sir.
They're challenges
Absolutely.
for us.
You know, we won a very spirited primary. There were 7 of us in the primary, and I was fortunate enough to come out on top. And one of the things you have to realize, it is about vote counting. It is about making sure you get one more than your opponent. And we did very well in the primary in my town of Nashua. It's the 2nd largest city in the state. And so whether I thought that I rested on my laurels or not, I can tell you we're going to look at it differently, because of the 9 wards in Nashua, I won none. None.
Everything went to the Democrat.
They did, and then even so, and so in the State House with your colleagues, everyone is a Democrat.
Everything went.
Of them.
Yeah, the entire city of Nashua
Yes,
went 27 representatives.
That's right.
Yeah.
So so what we did is that one of the things that's very difficult about second CD is that geographically it's a challenge, right? You only have 93 going north and 89 that goes into Vermont. Everything else is rural roads, right? So to traverse the second congressional is very difficult. And the reason why we're running again is a lot of people came up to me after we had lost, and I'll be honest with you, it stung, right? Because nobody likes losing, but you learn more from losing than you do from winning. I truly believe that. They said, please run again, because in 2014 the nominee did not come back in 16. And in 16, the nominee did not come back in 18.
Right.
Please don't let us have another brand new person that we're going to have to get to know.
Because it's just going to fail.
It is. Yep. I mean, it's very, very difficult. And so what we did, we said, you know what, we took the holidays off, and we thought about it, and we said, you know what, and not that we vote count, because we do. We had 113.
We all do.
We do. We had 113,990 votes for us.
That's awesome.
I know. That's our starting point. Right. We also know that 115,000 registered Republicans stayed at home.
And those are the people we need to reach.
Absolutely. And, and all of us.
Every one of us have to reach those people.
Yep. So we said, you know what? Okay, here's what we learned. We learned that you have to fundraise, right? And we know that she raised, of the $3.5 million she raised, very few of the dollars come from New Hampshire, right? And I understand New Hampshire people and principals. They're very frugal. They work hard for their money. So we know now that if we're going to compete at that stage, at that federal stage with my opponent, I have to go outside the state of New Hampshire. And we've done that.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
No. And
there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever.
That's right. The majority of people who donate to my campaign will be from New Hampshire.
Yes.
The $25 donations.
Yes.
The $50 donation. The $5. I had an elderly woman write me a card. Herschel, this is going to bring you to your knees. She goes, I don't have much, but what I do have is a prayer and a $1 bill.
Oh, my goodness.
They're both yours.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm telling you, that's why you run.
That's loyalty.
Right?
That's someone who believes in what you're doing.
That's right. And that person, when she writes a bubble in for Herschel or for Steve, is just as much and just as valuable as somebody who gives $100,000.
That $1 means just as much.
Exactly right.
Yep.
And that's New Hampshire.
Yep.
I'm getting goosebumps.
That's okay.
That's New Hampshire. And so that's what drives me. That's what motivates me. So the majority of our people that are going to support us are going to be from New Hampshire, but I know I have to go out of state. So we were just in Ohio 3 weeks ago, and we were at a fundraiser, and I met Representative Jim Jordan from the Freedom Caucus.
Yes.
Had a great discussion with him, and he wants me to come down to Washington and see if there's something that we can work on together, that they can help us. The goal for us conservatives is to try to get the House back so that we can help put President Trump's agenda forward.
Yep.
And it really doesn't matter where the seats come from, right? And so they believe that we have a winnable seat this time, and I'm really excited about it.
Well, we're really excited about it too. Let's talk a little bit about some of those towns. Let's talk about Claremont and Lebanon and some of these other towns. Not only are they highly Democratic on the inside of the town, but the surrounding areas are not so Democratic.
That's right. And that's a lesson that I did not heed myself. And I didn't know because I didn't know it, right? So you look at Claremont, and you look at some of the surrounding towns. MacArthur did this in his push in the Pacific, right? If there was a stronghold island, he would just leapfrog that island and say, okay, I know we're not going to engage it directly, but I'll engage all the other ones and encircle that island. And that may be a strategy for us this time to say, you know what? Okay, maybe we may not get into Lebanon and win it, but there are people in Lebanon and people around Lebanon that are strong conservatives, and we shouldn't ignore them. We shouldn't be afraid of going into the belly of the beast.
That's right.
And Keene's the same way. So we have Kate Day, right, from the New Hampshire GOP. She's reaching out to all these different towns and setting up town committees. She's doing a phenomenal job, right, to be able to do those kind of things. Another Southern girl, right?
Yep.
So we know now that, A, we shouldn't be afraid of what's in front of us.
Right.
You need to just be able to make sure, understand what your liabilities are and your weaknesses. You bolster those and you get after it, right?
Yep.
My father used to say, I may get beat, but it won't be because of lack of effort.
Well, I'll tell you what, you have a huge campaign trail in front of you. And you and I have talked previously about how to reach into all of those areas. And the fact that most of those areas haven't been reached over the past 6 years.
That is true. That is true.
And a lot of the folks in those areas just don't vote.
Right.
And we need to go reach them and talk to them and make sure that they come out and that they vote.
And that's so true. You know, we just this past Friday. So we went up to Franklin once, and there's some. I never went to Andover, right? And so we decided, you know what? They're having a 4th of July parade. We're going to Andover, and we were the only person that was running that was there at Andover. And the reception we got, Herschel, was, "Thank you for coming here." Mm-hmm. I'm like, I get it, right? I get it. So we're going to have a concerted effort to try and reach everybody, whether it's by mail. You know, we couldn't go up on TV a lot last time because it was just this fiscal reality that we didn't have the money to do that. As a matter of fact, my opponent spent $1.3 million, I think, just on TV ads alone, which was more than my entire budget for both the primary and the general.
Right.
So we know now what's in front of us, right? You know, it may take a campaign. Sometimes a farmer plants a field and nothing grows that year, you know, but the next year maybe.
But the next year it flourishes.
Right.
Well, let's talk about that, because in this last race, you still got 41% of the vote.
42.2, not that.
42. I thought it was 41. 42.2% of the vote.
That's true.
And that is more of a percentage than any of her other opponents have had in the time that she's been in there.
That is true. We had the highest midterm vote total since 2004.
And the highest total against her with a minimum part of her budget.
That's correct. And we had some handicaps, right? The RNC did not come into New Hampshire to help. And I'm not pointing fingers, these are just statements.
It's just statements, yeah.
The NRCC, they said, look, we like you. You're Hispanic, you're a veteran, you're a small business owner, you're a man of faith, you're a member of your community. We love all those things, right? But you have no money. And so when we look at the calculus, we need to make sure that we maintain incumbencies, which I get. You know, we have to look at those people that are in toss-up races. And if there's anything left, you know, maybe there's something.
We can give you some.
So they said, look, we're going to be upfront with you. If you get 10%, you're going to be lucky. I'm like, okay. I mean, that stung, but I get that. And given that adversity, and even our state party, you know, was struggling a little bit.
Yes.
Even all
we all felt that struggle.
Right. And no money, right, to speak of. To pull down 42% of the vote, to me, that was huge.
I think it was awesome.
It was.
I think it was awesome. Unfortunately, you didn't prevail in the race, but it certainly made a statement.
It did.
And in that statement, you have about 113,000 to stand on.
That's right. That's right.
So the numbers came in. There was 113,000 plus people who were voting for Steve Negron.
That's correct.
So that's where we start this time.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I got to tell you, the first town that came in was Loudon, and we won by like 300 votes. And I grabbed my hair. I'm like, oh my God, is this really going to happen? That was the last time that happened. Right?
Well, let's talk about some of the issues now.
Yes, sir.
Now, we've talked about the cash and the way that we appreciate every New Hampshire voter that comes in and helps us out. But we also know that we have to look for outside cash.
That's correct.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Every party does that.
Sure.
Every party does that. Let's also talk about some of the politics that's going on. Now, I know that your opponent has teamed up with some of the freshman liberal progressives in the U.S. Congress. And there's a national Democrat agenda that's being pushed in our state because of that. And tell me what you think about that and what you think we might be able to do about that.
Well, you and I kind of share the same sentiment because you're seeing it in a smaller scale in the State House today. You know, I call it the sparkler effect, right? You know, you light a sparkler, it starts flashing, and people are like, ooh and ah, you know, but sooner or later the thing burns out, right? I truly believe in the fundamental fabric of this country. And I believe that when push comes to shove, and I've had Democrats tell me, you know, this is not the party of John Kennedy, for example. This isn't it. You know, nobody wants to be in a socialist country. They don't. And you're finding that, and you look at Venezuela just as the most recent example, right? Where they were 10, 15 years ago, right? They were a thriving economy. You know, they had oil reserves. They were out there. And then and I think it was Margaret Thatcher said it best. I said, you know, socialism only works until you run out of other people's money.
Right.
And I think right now you have these people. They're very loud. Not as in, I mean, they're getting a lot of attention. You know, you've got a freshman who's from New York that's getting as much attention as our president, you know, in some things. And that's okay. It's a novel thing. I get it, you know, and let them have their couple of minutes of fame, but I truly believe in the people of this country, that when you put C Spot Run in front of them and say, is this really what you want this country to be? I think that we're going to prevail again, and I think the president's going to do very well. I think you guys are going to take the House back in the state, because we may have...
And I think you're going to win CD2.
Well, from your lips to God's ears, right? I think when you look at who we are as a country and how they're trying to distort of what our founding fathers were all about, and we're all about personal liberties, right?
Yes,
we're all about,
absolutely.
You know, that we get to decide what we want to do.
Individual freedom.
Absolutely. You don't have to agree with me, right? And that's okay. If you agree with me, then that's two of us now that are in lockstep. But, you know, for somebody to tell me, to dictate to me what I can do as an individual, I think that's going to be the last run. I think that you're going to see a lot of people push back when they start realizing it. And that's our responsibility, Herschel.
It is.
To package that, to make sure that the people that we talk to understand what the basic differences are.
It is. You know, I think that when we see some of the legislation that's going through Congress, the U.S. Congress,
Yes, sir.
I know what's coming through the State House. And what's hitting us is almost a mirror of what they're trying to do there. So it's a nationalist agenda that's being pushed by the entire Democratic Party.
Right.
And it's not only happening in our state, but all the other states are being hit with the same legislation. I just came back from a meeting in Memphis and learned, I spent a lot of time with a lot of legislators from other states in that meeting. And they said the same thing that we're saying right now, that same agenda is being pushed in their states as well.
Right.
And so there's a definite organization and a push. We have to push back.
Right.
We have to push back.
Right. And not be afraid of what we stand and what we believe in. You know, I think sometimes we're afraid to say something because either somebody's going to label us something, you know, and oh my God, that's not right. I don't want to feel that. Well, you know, sometimes you have to take a punch to the jaw. You have to.
Sometimes you do.
You have to, but you have to move forward, right? I mean, it's growing up, and I know that people will, you know, look at me differently, but my father used to say, if there's a bully in the playground, right, you go punch him in the mouth. You know, then he's no longer a bully.
Right.
But if you allow that to persist, then it gets traction, and now it becomes even a harder thing for us to do.
Yep. Let's talk about some of the things that we've learned about our economy.
Right.
Our economy is a very important thing in the state of New Hampshire, and having someone represent us in Washington and has the values that we want for our economy in New Hampshire being represented there.
Absolutely.
I don't think that we have that representation right now. The National Federation of Independent Business put out a report this past July 1st. It was put out right after the Democrats made a speech about how the current economy wasn't good for small business. Well, the National Federation of Independent Business reported on July 1st that we are in the best economy in the U.S. in 50 years where it pertains to small business. Now, I know you're a small business owner.
Right.
I've been a small business owner. And we love, that's music to our ears.
It is.
It is music to our ears.
Right.
So where is the contradiction in what the Democrats are saying and what the National Federation of Independent Business puts out for us? Where's the ball being dropped there?
Right. Well, I think, first of all, you have to look at the Democrats, you know, aren't big believers in free market, right? They're just not. They'd rather be, they want to hold the money and then they just drip it out, you know, as they see fit. Look, in a small business, cash is king.
It is.
I mean, that's our livelihood, right?
Yep.
A small business accounts for the majority of jobs, not only in New Hampshire, but across this great country.
Yes.
And so what we're seeing is, you know, when this tax package went through in 17 or 18, I absolutely had an opportunity to hire a new employee, happened to be a Navy veteran. So, you know, when I talked to Terry, she goes, be very careful when you talk about profit. I said, well, profit's not a bad word, especially when you replow that profit back into your company.
Right.
Where I can hire somebody else.
Right.
And then that person now pays taxes, and that person now buys in the economy. So it's this self-fulfilling model, right? When you stifle that, when you slow that down, and our economy is going like gangbusters right now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those are the kind of things that me as a small business guy, I love. You know, when I was in the State House, we fought to keep the BET, the business enterprise tax,
Yep.
and the business profits tax
Lower.
And it's funny, when you lower taxes, we have more revenue. And people cannot...
We've been having record revenue streams
That's
come
right.
in
That's
from
right.
the tax decreases that were put in 2018.
That's right. And now you see in the state, right, and same thing at the federal level, for some reason they think that kind of windfall is bad, right? Because they're saying, well, if I have that windfall, I should spend it. We think, no, you don't spend it, right? you save it, you figure out where you're going to use it, and you portion it, accordingly to where it's needed. So as a small business owner, I love this tax. I like to make these tax cuts permanent.
Yep.
But I just have to say, as a segue, we can't talk about tax cuts without talking about reducing the debt.
Correct.
Right. So I'm a big debt reduction guy.
Yep.
So if we left the tax package that the president did alone, that in of itself is going to bring on an additional maybe $1.5 trillion in debt.
Right.
We have to talk about reducing the debt.
Right.
At the same time.
There has to be some type of cut somewhere else that's going to bring that deficit down.
That's right. And it's something that wasn't popular when we were talking about it, because you got to rip the Band-Aid off.
Yep.
Right. And as a guy who's owned a small business almost now 14 years, there are some things you have to do that are hard. Your parents had to do it when they were running their household.
Yep.
You had to do it when you were running your business.
I had to do it.
Right?
Yep.
So there's no free ride out there, and I'm talking about everything's on the table. Entitlements are on the table. Mm-hmm. Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. I'm not saying cut it. I'm saying you have to look at it, right? Mm-hmm. Because the math is very simple. We have less people putting in today and more people taking out.
That's right.
Sooner or later, that ends, right? And who's going to be left holding the bag? So it's not a popular thing to talk about, right? And I know that there's going to be a lot of spears thrown my way, but I'd rather have those spears thrown my way and at least bring some sight picture to it to say, guys, enough is enough. We cannot keep on spending ourselves into this debt that these young kids are going to have to deal with. Sorry, I went on a segue.
No. That's fine, because it's part of what we're talking about. Even though Trump put the tax cuts in,
correct,
we all got to be part of that.
That's right.
We were all afforded some things from that.
Right.
My taxes look great this year.
Sure.
And that coupled in New Hampshire with the BET and the BPT reductions that caused us to have a nice windfall.
That's right.
That has since been hijacked by the Democrats to place somewhere else instead of on one-time spending infrastructure. Right. That's state.
Right.
We're talking about U.S. Congress.
Right.
In Congress, it's so much bigger than what we can even imagine here. We know that Trump has invested highly in the military.
Right.
We also know that he is looking in other areas and curbing cutting in other areas. He's looked at the federalization of education and said, we need to hone this down a little bit.
Right.
Now, I know that in education, you have certain viewpoints about education as well. So I brought that up for a reason. Let's talk about education a little bit, and you can tell us about what you think about things like school choice and things about homeschooling or charter schools, and or if it's all about public education to you.
Right. Well, that's a great segue. So I'll talk to you first now as a parent, right? As a parent, we need to make a decision as to what's in the best interest of our children, right? Not dictated to me by somebody that's in a small cutout area of Virginia, right? And I've had a child and 3 children in private school. I've had them in public school. I've had them in parochial school. So, we didn't have a charter school at the time, but I probably would have looked at that as well. So my wife and I have a very good understanding of what the school system provide the children. I can tell you that the single equation for success, and it doesn't matter if it's charter, public, private, parochial, is the relationship between the parent, the child, and the teacher. That's where it's at. We were never parents that dropped our kids off and said, thank you, you have them for 8 hours, and then we'll do some work, when they get home. We supported the teachers on what they were trying to do to instill. And my sister-in-law has been a teacher for 30 years at Long Beach Catholic in Long Island. And they have one of the hardest jobs in this country, with the potential of providing the biggest reward and benefits of children that learn. And, I think education needs to be pushed down to the state level. I think that the state of New Hampshire, state of Idaho, state of Wisconsin, your demographic, your constituents. You should be able to teach the way you feel is best in your state, right? I don't think we can do that from Washington. I'm not a big government guy, right? You need to get out of the business of letting the state legislature understand what's best for the constituents and let them. Now, if there's federal dollars to have, caveat emptor or buyer beware, because anytime you take federal money, there's a hook.
There's always a hook.
Right? And so we need to be very careful. But as we just talked about, with the windfall that's out there, maybe there's some things that can be done. I know there's a guy that you serve with right now, Greg Hill. who's an unbelievable
great representative.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When it comes to education for children. And he and I share the same belief, is that if you think your child is going to benefit better in a charter school and you get in, that's your responsibility as a parent. We had 2 kids go to parochial school for high school and 1 in a public school. And all 3 kids flourish, right? We know I can't stick a round peg in a square hole.
That's right.
Right? And so every child, and it has to be a communal decision with the parent, the child, and the educator to do that. You know, some people have asked me about, you know, things like Common Core. You know, I said, when you start mandating out there, you know, one size does not fit all.
That's right.
And I think that we have to release the grip of the Department of Education on the states, you know, and let the states, you know, we've got Frank Edelblut, who's a phenomenal.
He's a great commissioner, yeah.
Absolutely. And let, you know, he knows what's going on. He's out there in the trenches. And let the states decide what's best for their children when it comes to education.
You know, so many people aren't even aware of educational choice. They think that the only option is for public school. But there are different programs. There are charter schools and there's homeschooling.
Absolutely.
And there's even a form of that called unschooling that is popular in some areas, where you allow your child to study what they want to study and excel in what they want to excel in. And we have found through many different studies and watching children grow up in the areas that we live in that education doesn't work the same way for every child. And that's why a parent should always be open to options, especially when it comes to situations where a child may have difficulty in their surroundings. Sometimes there's bullying. Sometimes there's the child just doesn't jive with the teacher. You know, for saying it another way, they just don't understand the teacher. But I agree with you that the children, the parents and the children work together and they find out the best avenue for the education for the child.
And the other thing too is that I've always talked about is that, you know, we've become a country that, and I don't know when it happened, that all of a sudden the only measure of success is that if your child graduates from high school and then goes on to a 4-year institution, or some people are going to a 2-year community college and into a 4-year institution. I would tell you that, you know, we've lost our way when it comes to trades. You know, that I remember growing up that, you know, Mr. Wilson, you know, who had 5 electric trucks, you know, a good honest day's work, you know, and those of us who paid electricians to come do work in your house, you know, they make a good salary. I don't know where we lost our way as a country, that somebody looks down at that as somebody who's a laborer, who's a bricklayer, a mason, a welder, a carpenter, a plumber.
Those are all wonderful trades.
Absolutely, they're wonderful trades.
And you can make a lot of money in those trades.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. You know, and I believe that we need to look at, you know, these trade schools, you know, that they should be propped up and given opportunities. Because look, you and I both know, not college isn't for everybody, right? I mean, I struggled. You know, I got it. Would I have loved to have done something else? I don't know. I mean, that wasn't a path that I took. But, you know, that has to be commensurate with as an option for other people to do. You know, there are some great schools. I have a good friend of mine who, young man goes to a school in Massachusetts, and his trade line was being a plumber. So we had academics one week, and then he was working with a plumber, and so he gets out, he gets a job, you know. So
helper, journeyman, goes on up to get his master plumber's license.
You bet. You know, and I think that's a wonderful thing. And you know, somehow along the way we thought that a parchment. And I heard this from Senator Rubio. He was talking someplace in Hollis, and he goes, "Nothing against philosophy majors, right? You know, but what are you going to do with that? You know,
right.
I mean, if that's your core of study, that's great, but where are the trades? You know, where are those things? That's just as important to keep this economy going.
Those trades are what keeps our infrastructure in place.
Absolutely.
You know, the infrastructure of our houses and our buildings and of our roads and of our electrical lines, all of those things. There has to be somebody to service all of that because it's not automated. It doesn't appear by itself. And you know, having the opportunity to put those trade schools out in front of our children and let them look at those areas, not only can they work and do a good day's work and learn and earn a good wage, but they can also excel for themselves in the future, become their own business owners, just like we were, and be very profitable at it.
That's right. And I think when you have something that's yours, and you own it, you know, there's a sense of pride that goes along with that. To your point, Herschel, and I think part of some of the problems I'm seeing with some of the young kids is that they don't have anything that's theirs. You know, they don't have anything that they can own, and I think that that's something that would benefit them in many aspects of their lives. Absolutely.
Well, Steve, give us a little wrap up here, and tell us about where you're going to be, what you're going to be doing, how your campaign's going to be going.
Sure.
I know you've got a new campaign manager.
So we're interviewing some people, and that was
Yep.
one of the things that we wanted to do. We wanted to have, because you don't know what you don't know, right? And so I had a great guy. He wore like 9 hats. He was my general consultant. He was my campaign manager. He was my fundraiser. He was my chief cook, bottle washer. Now we know it's like, okay, things have got to. I have to let go of some things and realize I'm a Type A. That you have to I have to trust Herschel.
Yeah.
If Herschel's going to get this, I have to have that kind of faith in him.
Let him do his job.
Let him do his job,
Yeah.
right? And that was a little bit difficult for me, having done what I've done in the service and then having my own business. So we are really right now, we're close to bringing somebody on.
Yep.
And then that person is going to be the face of the campaign. He'll be meeting out there. We have a scheduler that's on board. That's crucial for us.
Yes.
So we're going to do some things in a more structured way, I think, this time, and I'm excited about it. We're having I think it's coming up in the 1st of August. We're going to have like an offsite. I don't know, when you worked in industry, went off someplace and you had flip charts and you talked about things and stuff. And we're going to talk about those things, like
Yep.
what we did well last time, what didn't we do well. Let's keep the things we did. Let's throw out the stuff that we didn't. Let's relearn. So our website isn't up yet. It's just a splash page for donations, but it's www.negron, the number 4congress.com. So we realized that our splash page or our website last time was functional, but did it grab you? So we're going to do those kind of things. But I'm excited about it, man. I'm excited about this summer is about fundraising for us. That we're dialing for dollars. We're on the phone and talking to people, and we get into the fall. We're going to be doing all those things that we did before. And quite frankly, we never stopped campaigning. We took a break in the holiday season, but you'll be seeing a lot of us here in the near future.
Well, I know that I'm looking forward to seeing you out on the campaign trail. It's only 2019, and that campaign actually, the voting comes in 2020.
That's correct.
But just like you, I can't stop either. I'm out there campaigning just like you are, accepting donations and getting it done, because we need to make sure that we take our seats in the respective houses that we're running for.
Absolutely.
Steve, thank you for coming on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, my friend.
I appreciate you being here. What an honor to have you. Folks, we're going to take a moment here, and then we're going to come back with our next segment with the Pelham GOP to give us an update on what they're going to be doing. I want to thank Steve Negron for coming in and let us having a little glimpse into his life and his aspirations, and we want to wish him well in his campaign. I know I'm going to be voting for him, and I want you to do it as well. So we'll be back in just a few minutes. Thanks. Folks, we're back with John Spottiswoode with the Pelham GOP. John, thanks for being on the show.
Welcome.
Why don't we talk a little bit about what's going on with the GOP these days?
All right. Well, first and foremost, I'd like to say we recently had our voter appreciation night in May, and it was a fantastic night. Lots of people showed up, lots of new faces, which is always great to see. So I thank you for some of the work you did getting the word out on that one. We had a great.
You know what? We had a wonderful evening. There were so many people that came in. They sat down. We all had dinner together. We had a lot of dessert together, and we got to talk to the constituents out there. We got to talk to the residents of the town and let them bend our ears a little bit and tell us what they were interested in. I want to thank the Pelham GOP for putting that event on. We had 10 reps from our district that showed up to that event, and what I heard from the constituents is that, oh my God, now we know what y'all look like.
Yep.
So it was a lot of fun. Thanks a lot for that. We had a great time. What's been going on since then?
Well, we obviously have some candidates that have announced. For U.S. Senate, we have General Bolduc, and I believe William O'Brien will be announcing very shortly. So of course we will do our best to have those candidates come through Pelham and meet the voters, because that's what we do. And of course the Honorable Steve Negron, I'm sure will be back to visit us at some point. So yeah, I mean we're getting the wheels going and watching who's announcing and starting some scheduling.
And I heard that the Pelham GOP participated in some 4th of July events with the county, with Hillsborough.
Yes.
Yep.
As far as members from the Pelham GOP, we did march in the Amherst Parade and the Merrimack Parades.
Along with the Hillsborough County
Correct.
GOP.
Yep.
Because not only are you the chair of the Pelham GOP, you're also the vice chair of the county.
Correct.
Of Hillsborough County GOP, correct?
Yes.
And your wife Laura is an area chair.
Yes.
You guys are very, very busy people.
We stay very busy.
So what do we have coming down the line here in town?
Next up for us, next big event would obviously be Pelham Old Home Day.
Okay.
That's a great event for us. We will have a booth like always, probably marching the parade. We will be there all day. Come see us. We always have great interaction with the voters.
Old Home Day on September the 14th.
Correct.
Correct. September the 14th, and everybody needs to come out and come by the Pelham GOP booth, say hello to everyone. Yep. I think we're going to have some merch on the table.
Absolutely.
That are donations that are being given. There's going to be a lot of people around to talk to everybody when they stop by.
Yep.
So that's the next big thing we're working on. And we can use your help, folks. So contact the Pelham GOP, come to the meetings, and meet everybody, and help us organize a really great Old Home Day.
Yep.
John, I'm going to cut it off here. That's a great update. Thank you for being on the program again.
Always.
And we'll catch this next month, and we'll have another update.
Perfect.
Thanks, folks, for tuning into Granites Edge. We appreciate all your views. We appreciate you looking at us on YouTube, on Facebook. We appreciate you looking at us on the local access TV channels in both Pelham and Hudson. And we'll be coming back to you again next month with some more news. And thank you very much for being here with us.
We'd like to thank each and every one of you for tuning in to today's program. Each month, we'll bring you new information about legislation that's being proposed in our state capitol. If you'd like to find us or comment on our program, contact us on Facebook at Granites Edge. We also have a YouTube channel by the same name. Links that were mentioned in our program today will be listed there for your convenience. Tune in next time to Granites Edge.